Welcome to Candid Conversation number 260. Rico in the Ukraine asks a question. He says, you talk about how men are to be the head of the woman, husband be the head of the wife, and she's supposed to do what he says to do. But what if that doesn't work? What if the woman becomes the head? He knows several instances where women are oppressing their husbands, not allowing them to work, physically abusing them, yelling at them, taking charge of the household. What do you do in that case? Well, I did a video called Stay With Your Abusive Husband. This one's called Stay With Your Abusive Wife. It's the same principle. I mentioned how if a man is beating his wife, and I said no one would really blame her for leaving, but God says what God had joined together, let no man put asunder. When a couple gets married, the two become one flesh, and that is a lifetime bond. It doesn't matter if one member is doing horrible things to the other member. God honors your role. You're supposed to honor your role. God says that the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the believing husband. If she is pleased to stay with you, then do not put her away. Keep her as your wife. And just like the wife, even though she's beat by her husband, she should stay with him because she's made a lifetime commitment. Then it's the same thing when it comes to a wife who is abusing her husband. And that is the case, a lot of that today. Remember, the two become one flesh when you get married. Just like if you have a hand that isn't working good, you don't just cut off the hand. Even, people who are paralyzed. My grandfather had a stroke. The right side of his body was paralyzed. He didn't say, oh, we'll just cut off my right arm because it's paralyzed. Even though it wasn't doing what it was supposed to do, he kept his right arm. And that's the same thing when it comes to your spouse. The two become one flesh. The man is to control the woman. He is to be the leader of the household. If she becomes the leader, if she takes control, she's not fulfilling her role as a wife, but you are still one with her. And so you need to stay with her, take her abuse. And a woman abusing the husband a lot of times is a lot worse than the husband abusing the wife. Maybe she's not physically beating you, maybe she is. But it's just all the mental stuff that goes on when in a case like that is a lot harder on a man than it is when it happens to the woman, because of how our brains work. No one would blame you if you divorced your wife because of she's taking control and she's not fulfilling her role to be submissive to her husband. But at the same time, because you've been made one flesh with her, you should stay with her. Unfortunately, this is the situation in probably most marriages today. At least it may not be an extreme in a lot of cases, but in probably pretty much every marriage nowadays, the woman takes control over the man. She is not fulfilling her role. And it's the opposite of what it used to be 100 years ago. Our society, 100 years ago, the man was in charge of the woman just like God intended. And it was a lot like, the slaves back in the 1800s. There were some masters who physically beat and harmed their slaves and did bad to them. But In most cases, they treated them well. Most masters treated the slaves well. They understood, they could get away with that stuff, especially in the South. Back in the 1800s, you could beat or you could kill your slave, and you probably wouldn't go to jail over it. But why would you do that? You bought the slave. I mean, sure, you could do bad stuff to the slave, but you want the slave to work and help you out at the house. And because a lot of people had good godly values back then, they treated the slaves that they had in their house well. And it was the same case when it came to the women. The women had no economic power to be able to say, I'm leaving you, you're mistreating me, and I'm just going to live on my own. They didn't have the wealth to support themselves. So, the man could abuse the woman and she couldn't really get out of it. But still, again, that's the woman that you're one with. That's the one that's supposed to take care of you, and you take care of her. And so, sure, there were cases of men who beat their wives and were real mean to them. But for the most part, men treated their wives at least with some respect. Not that they were perfect all the time, because no one is. But most of the marriages worked out well. But the bad thing is, when you have in today's society, when the feminists started 100 years ago and tried to get more power to women, they got the vote and they wanted to be equal. Well, now the tables have turned, and now the women are lording over the men. They're not equal, but they are the rulers. There's a book I mentioned before called The Death of Right and Wrong by Tammy Bruce. Came out in 2004. She is a lesbian feminist. She was president of the National Organization of Women in Los Angeles. But yet she says in her book that she was all for equal rights for women. But she says that's not what it's about. Now it's women having the power over the men. And this was 15 years ago that she wrote this book. She left the NOW organization way before them. And she left because she's all for equal rights, but she's not for women taking control over men. And this is a lesbian feminist telling people this. And she's exposing the radical feminist movement in the book. One of the chapters there. It's a very good book. And that's what it's about today. It's the women taking control. And there are a couple things that are bad about this that really lead to society's ruin. The society operates according to the conscience of the woman for the most part. The first reason it's bad is because that's how God made things. The man is selfish in nature. The woman is she's family oriented in nature. It's not that the man doesn't care about his wife and his kids. It's just that his mind doesn't work to think about those things. He's focused on himself more. That's why it's very common for a husband not to remember the anniversary date, to get an anniversary present, or to remember his wife's birthday, or just simple things. The men, it's not that the man doesn't care about his wife, it's that it just doesn't come into his mind. But women, they're family oriented. They think about others first. That's just how their minds work. That's why the women get so frustrated with men when they when they forget their birthday or forget their anniversary, because then they feel like they don't love them anymore. Because a woman can never forget those things. But it's not that the man doesn't love his wife, it's just that, that's not on his mind. It's just like if we're at a restaurant, if there's a woman who is dressed weirdly, or a man that's dressed weirdly or something, I don't really notice it usually. It has to be pretty far out there for me to notice something. Or, let's talk about men not noticing their women when their wife gets their hair done. Then they're all excited about how good their hair looks, and they want their husbands to see. and the husband doesn't even notice that they got a different hairstyle. That doesn't mean he doesn't love her. It's just men just don't notice those things. That's not how their minds work. Women, God made women to be the conscience of the family, to raise up the children, to teach them right from wrong, to make sure that we do good unto others. And it's more in the mind of women. You look in Titus in chapter 2, it says that the young men are to be sober-minded. That's the only thing they're given. But the women are told to be discreet, chaste, keepers of the home, obedient to the husband, and all these things. They've got a list of, I think, 8 things there. The men only have one thing. Women are the doers, the men are the thinkers. That's just how God made it. And so that's why the women are to be servants of the husband. They are submit to them because they are the doers. Just like when you go to work, if you're the boss, you're the thinker and you tell people what to do. If you are the servant, you do what the boss tells you to do. And it's the same thing with the husband and the wife. The wife is the servant. She's to do what the husband tells her to do, tells her to do. If the man is the thinker, he is the one who comes up with the instructions. And that's just how God made it. Nothing right or wrong, it's right, nothing wrong with that, nothing bad about it. That's just how God made it. Well, now the women are in control. There are so many women senators and members of the House now, women leading organizations. The women have the economic power, and you can't dare even look at a woman and she thinks she's not interested in you sexually, and you even look at her, but she's going, "Oh, you sexually harassed me." Men are not like that. When there is a divorce, the women get the kids, they get the money, and the men are left hanging out to dry. They got nothing in it. And this is such a bad thing in society because it's against the natural role. As I mentioned 100 years ago, there might be some men who beat their wives, and that's a bad thing. They shouldn't be doing that. But it's still not against the role that God gave them in that they are the master of the woman. But when a woman takes control and she is only concerned about herself, then the society is lost. Because the women are the conscience. They're the ones who raise up the children, take care of things. And now that women are in control, now instead of them trying to please their husbands, the culture that we're in has taught them that they are their own woman, that woman power, and they are in control, and they need to do what they want to do. And so what that's done is it's destroyed the conscience of America, of our society. And so who are there to raise the kids? Kids run wild today because women aren't there to discipline them. Women have become selfish. Who takes care of the things at home? Not the women. They're out there working, and they're in control with the economic power. They don't like what their man does to them. They say, "I don't care, I'm leaving you, or I'm going to treat you badly." When the women become selfish, the society is lost. And one example of this was when I was a kid, I watched a sitcom growing up. It was on ABC. It was called Boy Meets World. And it had this boy who had an older brother, a younger sister, and parents. And the parents were good examples of what parents should be. The woman guided the house, the man worked and controlled the economy and of the house, and the woman listened to what her husband said. Well, then, a few years, probably at least 5 years ago, there was a show on Disney Channel, and I don't know if it's still on or not, I think it's called Girl Meets World. And what they did is they took the boy who was in Boy Meets World, who is now an adult, and they took his girlfriend on the show, and the two of them are now married, and they are the parents, and now there's a girl growing up. And we happened to watch one show when we were in the hospital one time, and it was on TV, and we watched this one show, and you could just see the transformation in that. The woman is controlling everything. The man just sits there like an idiot. He does nothing. The only thing the man does is he's good for a few jokes. And that's what society has, that's what women have reduced husbands to. The husbands have no control of their household anymore. If they dare speak against the woman's up in arms. And just like today with the children, they declare child abuse. The women declare domestic abuse. Call the police out there. And the woman is the one who started the argument, and one did something against the man, but yet the man is locked up in jail. The power for the man to lead his household has been taken away from him in this liberal feminist movement that we are in, and it's really all over the world, I believe. And the man, all he does is he's just a puppet of the woman. And when that happens, there's nothing for the man to do. All he does is he's the humor, he's the relief. The women just take control, bark out orders, and if the men don't do it, they start complaining, they start yelling, they start screaming, they start enforcing their will upon the man. In most families, that's how it is today. And the man just can't do anything. If the man wants to do something he wants to do, tough. The woman says he can't do it. And what are you going to do? You know? So, the only thing the man's good for now is cracking a couple jokes. And for sex for the woman. That's all it is now. And so that ends up in the destruction of society. It ends up, in that case, what's happening today, the reason that homosexuality has become so prevalent, and it will become rampant like Sodom and Gomorrah eventually, and the reason is because women are taking control and they are not doing their servant roles. When the women take control, there's no place for the men to go. They can't fulfill their role in their house. You know, if a man's beating the woman and the man's in control, well, he's not doing his role properly, but he's still doing his role of the master. But if the woman is verbally abusing her husband, hitting him, not allowing him to make any decisions, like Rico says, he destroys his things where he can't work at home and keeps him from doing what he's supposed to do. They say hell hath no fury than a woman scorned. When women rule like that, they are completely selfish, they are out of their roles, and they do a much worse job than men do because that's not their mindset. That's not what God made them to be. God says in the Bible, Jesus says, there are some eunuchs who are born, there are some eunuchs made of men. Some people are born without a sex drive, and some have a sex drive, but men in their culture cause them to not want to have sex, to be celibate. And it's the same thing with women. Women are made to serve the men. That's how God made them, the servant role. Doesn't mean they're worse than men. That's just the role that God gave them. But yet culture has taken them and changed them into where they are controlling the men. They are the ones in power. And when that happens, the men have no way to go. Their mind is set to be the master of the woman. And when the woman won't listen and he can't be the master, there's nothing he can do. He can't take the servant role. He doesn't do that well. His mind isn't made to take the servant role. It's like you have these undercover boss. If you've ever seen that show on TV, they'll have the guy who is the CEO of the corporation or some big official making millions of dollars, and he goes out to the stores, and now he's trying to make Subway sandwiches or do the things on the line, load a truck or whatever it is, the menial tasks. And he's terrible at it. He can't do it. And he does a terrible job. Well, that's because that's not what he's trained to do. His training is in leading the company, not being a servant. And it's the same thing with men. Men's minds are made to be masters, to be leaders. That's how God made them. And when the woman takes control, he fails in the man fails in the servant role. And then you look at what's going on today in society with the Hollywood, Harvey Weinstein, I think his name was, in Hollywood, who abused these women. Sure, he shouldn't have done that. But what it's resulted in now is this Me Too movement. And the women now have the power in the sexual arena when it was supposed to be the men who take charge of that. Men sometimes end up raping women, and they're not supposed to do that. But at least they're still in the master role when they do that. But when women take control of the sexual arena, then the men have nowhere to go except to other men. Women taking control of the society results in homosexuality. Bottom line, that's how it is. Because the men can't serve their role as servants. And so society makes some of them into servants, like taking the female role in the relationship, and other men stick to their guns and do what they're supposed to do as masters, and then they end up having homosexual relationships. And the reason they do that is because the women take control, and there's no way where a man can go with that. So if you're a man in that relationship with the wife, you should stay with her, just like I told the women to stay with their abusive husbands. But if you leave, no one's blaming you, because just like the women who are abused by their husbands, no one's blaming you in that case, because it's a very difficult situation. It's hard for you to set a godly example when you are supposed to lead the household and your wife doesn't allow you to lead the household. And so, like this Me Too movement now, women can sue men over anything sexually, but the men can't sue the women over it. And even if the man does get a woman who won't sue him and supposedly loves him, well, she's taking control of the house. He can't get a word in edgewise except to crack a few jokes. So he can't fulfill his role. He ends up being miserable, because he is supposed to be Lord over the woman. That's how God made him. And he can't do it because the feminist movement and everything and the culture is against him. If he dares say anything against the woman, it's verbal abuse, and he's a bad husband. But if the woman does anything against the man, nothing is ever done to her. She's just finally coming out of the oppression of the man over her. And so there's nowhere for the men to go except the homosexual relationships. That's why Sodom and Gomorrah, you had men there. And of course, when a homosexual thing, you see that they just overpowered and wanted to have sex with the angels that were there. So the men end up going to the other extreme, and they go homosexual because the woman doesn't fulfill the role of the woman, so there is no woman to do it. So now they got to get men to become feminine to fulfill the role of the woman in these homosexual relationships. And society is all changed up, and when that happens, the society is going to be destroyed. There is no conscience. It's all selfishness. No one doing anything for themselves, because the men are made selfish, and then the women are made selfish by the society. So now everybody is selfish, and no one cares about anybody else. They're only out for themselves. That's the state of Romans 1:28 through 32, where God gives them over to a reprobate mind after they become homosexuals in verses 26 and 27. And so God ended up destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. And Jesus says over in the book of Luke that as it was in the days of Lot, in the days of Sodom, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. There will be rampant homosexuality at Jesus' second coming, according to Jesus himself. In the book of Daniel, it says that the Antichrist does not regard the desire of women, meaning possibly that he is a homosexual. At least he doesn't have a wife, we know that. He's probably a homosexual. Homosexuality is what destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, and homosexuality is what's going to destroy this entire world. And the second coming of Christ, he's going to have to come, because there will be no one worth saving at that time. No one will believe the gospel, because when the man is selfish and the woman thinks of others, but then the woman is made by society to be selfish and only think of herself, then everybody is selfish. Everybody exalts themselves as God, And so then no one will recognize that they're a sinner and need to trust in Jesus' death as atonement for their sins. This feminist movement results in rampant homosexuality. I am confident that that's what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. The women got the economic power, the political power, they got control. The men became homosexuals because there's nowhere to go. There's no woman because the woman isn't fulfilling her role. And so they get men to do that role, and now it's homosexual, and no one will be saved in such a selfish society. So God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah, and the fact that this is happening in the world today, it shows that we are close to the second coming of Christ. The rapture could happen any moment. Personally, I think before 2030, within the next 10 years, and I'm hoping sooner, I believe the rapture will take place. Again, you can't tell by the days, and we're not in the prophecy program, I understand that, but there has to be a setup leading up to that. And when the world turns over to homosexuality, which is doing, thanks to the feminist movement, the result is that the society will be destroyed, just like Sodom and Gomorrah. Jesus says that's the situation at the second coming, and we're close to that now. So, should a man stay with his abusive wife? Yes, but I can't blame her if he leaves. And that situation, quite frankly, is a lot worse than a woman getting beat up with her husband, because at least she is in the servant role. He's not doing the master role correctly, but at least she's in the servant role. But with a woman taking control of the man, that's against nature. And it ends up for him going against nature, homosexuality. Thanks for watching.